Thank you very much. So we can open the floor for a few minutes for questions, and unfortunately I have to apologize on behalf of Mr. Soros, who is not here but meeting bilaterally the prime ministers. But I think that we have really distinguished speakers here who can answer the questions that will come from the audience. Nadi Rajepi, making the most of EU funds, and then David Mark from Roma Civic Alliance Romania.
Thank you. My question goes to Mr. Dordea from the DG Justice. Listening carefully about the principles that you introduced to us, I have to be very open here to say that these are not something new that we are listening for first time on Roma issues, but it's good that you are making clear message to us as a Roma, because I'm Roma myself, coming from Macedonia. And I would like to point out a few important moments about the future opinion in building the framework of the strategies of the countries. So, having agreed that there is no new principle compared with the previous initiatives on Roma issues, there is a need for further elaboration and clarification of these principles in order to meet the expectations of both sides. When I say both sides, it's on Roma expectations about the benefit and what we have to expect from the national strategies, and the second is the mainstream population. When the EU framework was announced, we got a clear message that the national strategies are more oriented to change the attitude of the mainstream population, but coming back to the decade experience, there is a need to meet the expectations of the Roma population, because the change are obvious that has to be there. And my question goes in that direction about to clarify the ownership of the policies that are going to be developed, because the playing game between the member states and the Brussels is ongoing in the last 10 years, and simply the Roma activists are confused, not to say they spend their capacities in dealing on these issues about finding the clear ownership of the policies. So I would like to listen more elaboration on these things.
Aurel, do you want to respond, or do I? Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot for the opportunity. I have two questions, and actually I'll have my first question to Mr. Željko Jovanović on behalf of OSI, although moderator, I think you are in the position to answer that, and to Mr. Ciobanu related to some of the issues he raised. So to Mr. Jovanović, both the decade and the EU framework are political intergovernmental processes, and I think that it's very much on the government so that they keep their commitment or not. Still, now with the EU coming in, we also have expectation from the EU to keep the commitments. But I would like to hear your views on the role of civil society in these processes, and how your organization looks at it. And to narrow down a bit the question is, how do you see our role looking at the contentious issue of, we have a role as advocates, as watchdogs often, but often we get into the implementation of programs and projects, and as a new issue, we often are in the position to represent or to take in representation roles and to mobilize communities at grassroots level. And the question is very clear how your organization is looking at that. And to Mr. Ciobanu, you mentioned in your speech the fact that you rely a lot in the monitoring part of the EU framework on the contribution of civil society, Roma and non-Roma as well. I would like to ask to detail a bit this issue. How do you mean to integrate our contributions, which are maybe often incisive, maybe often bothering to the European Commission, to governments, into the processes that you create? And I'd particularly be interested in how do you plan to integrate our contributions and our monitoring results in the upcoming EU platform? Thank you.
Já mám jenom krátký koment a zásadní otázku. Já si myslím, že OSI i vlastně Světová banka i všechny ty instituce, které se romskou dekádou zabývají, takže již ztratili kontrolu nad tím procesem. A tvrdím to z toho, protože pozorně jsem poslouchal klíčové panelisty, třeba poslouchal jsem pozorně George Sorose a z jeho vystoupení mi jednoznačně vyplynulo, že ztratil vlastně kontrolu nad tím procesem, protože to, co tady slyšíme posledních 5 let, nebo poslední rok nebo 2, tak to je virtuální realita. A já jsem se chtěl zeptat, a mám proto řadu důkazů, studií, analýz a nevím čeho všeho možného, protože jsme se za těch 5 let nebo 10 let to romské hnutí nechalo vlákat do pasti, a to pasti papíru, analýz a studií. A moje otázka je, jak vlastně tu agendu, agendu romské dekády, jako inkluze Romů do vzdělání, nezaměstnanosti, všech těch priorit, jak to chcete udělat v době krize. Protože ta krize je všude, pomalu ve všech členských státech Evropské unie, a mám z toho takový pocit prostě, že tady všichni jako říkají, jak budou integrovat Romy, ale tak trošičku mimo mísu, protože ta ekonomická situace ve všech členských státech je špatná. Nejenom u Romů, ale všeobecně. Ta nezaměstnanost je vysoká. Ty životní podmínky většiny populací v těch členských státech se zhoršily. A vracím se k tomu, proč se ztratili jako nad tím kontrolu. Protože čas pro akci, ten je pase. Takže jak to uděláte, jak to vysvětlíte veřejnosti a jak vlastně tady tyhle všechny krásné deklarace jak si zakomponujete do těch širších souvislostí, které se dějí v členských zemích Evropské unie. Děkuji.
If there are no more questions, I will let Aurel, one more from Mabera, Macedonian government.
Thank you, Željko. First clarification about Ms. Katerina's speech for the preschool education. In Macedonia, we have really very successful implementation of that project. For 4 years, we already include approximately 1,000 of children in preschool education. About the speech of Ms. Samuel and Mr. Dordea, both of them speak about the proposals of EU for the EU countries. But my question is, Macedonia will have now presidency of the decade. Macedonia and half of the decade countries are still non-EU countries. My question is how we can be on the focus of EU, because you mentioned here several events in next period, but not include Macedonia, Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, and all other non-EU countries. How we can be on your focus or on focus of EU? Thank you.
Thank you. So we can start with the answers session.
Yes, I did not understand the name of the first.
Nadir.
Okay. The questions raised by Mr. Recep, which I basically understood as being two. What's new with the EU framework, because we hear the same words, and secondly, the ownership of the integration policies belong to whom? I'll try to address them one by one. Of course, you take this cum grano salis, and you may want to be cautious when you hear since 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, the same words in all the international fora. And it is true that the European Union has become more aware or more committed only very recently. So it's your right to be cautious. But still, I would say that the current process that has been triggered at the level of the European Union in this year marks a significant difference. What we have noticed over the last 2-3 years, that the lack of attention to the Roma integration issues started to contaminate other EU policies. 2 years ago, we have seen the Czech visa crisis with Canada, because a lot of Roma individuals were migrating to Canada and they were asking for political asylum, and they were granted political asylum. At a certain moment, Canada has reintroduced visas to Czech nationals, and the Czech Republic turned to the European Union and said we should do something about this problem. And not very much has been done so far. 1 year ago, we have seen the problem of Roma of mainly Romanian origin in France, and expulsions from there, a lot of quarrels, and threat to one of the 4 fundamental freedoms of the European Union, which is a free movement of persons, and the Directive 2004/38. At that time, I was director for citizenship, for youth citizenship and fundamental rights, always in DG Justice, and I had to handle this crisis and infringement procedures against virtually, but at different stages, against virtually 20 member states, which were not in line with this directive. So these are serious issues, and these have triggered more political awareness at the level of the Commission and at EU level about the importance, the need to tackle this. And ultimately, it has changed a mantra at the level of the European Union. A few years ago, when the first Roma summit took place in Brussels, or an important meeting that was chaired by the Commission's President, José Manuel Barroso, the vision of the Commission was the Roma integration policies are not covered in formal terms by the provisions of the EU treaties. So this is exclusively national competence, and this is the truth. The Commission or the European Union are not administering directly, as in the time of the Roman Empire, different provinces of the empire. The administration and the responsibility lies with the member states. And the current EU framework says this: the primary responsibility continues to lay with the member states. But at EU level, we have become aware of the importance of this issue. We define a number of benchmarks and we commit to open a process in which, at political and technical level, we will check annually the success of the integration policies concerning Roma. That's it. You can be cautious, but there is something happening, and I hope that in a few years' time, and do not expect surprises from a day to another, from a week to another, or from a month to another. It will take years, but the progress must be steady, even if at a slower pace at the beginning, it should gain a higher pace later, and there should be noticeable progress. And with this, I hope I have clarified also our message in terms of ownership of the policies. The primary responsibility lies with the member states, also according to the principle of subsidiarity. The question from Mr. Mark. Participation of civil society. Well, first of all, this is a point of our discussion with the civil society on the 30th of June. So join us and we will discuss with you and listen to you. Although you are smiling. We have done the same 2 weeks ago with international organizations, trying to listen to what are their suggestions about the evaluation and assessment of the national integration strategies. And for 1 hour we were stuck in a certain lack of understanding, because I think the international organizations were surprised that the Commission asked them for suggestions, and they tried to give other answers. No, we are listening to you. We want to listen to you and indeed to find out fresh thinking and other ideas that haunt us behind the walls of Brussels. Join us on the 13th of June in order to discuss about how you can get involved. For instance, an idea would be shadow reporting. I understand that this is no novelty in the framework of Roma Decade. We should think about this in the framework of the European Roma Platform, also with the support and cooperation of the Secretariat of the Decade and of the Presidency of the Decade as well. But this is one idea. You may have others, but it is important to reach a certain understanding of this by the time when the next Roma Platform takes place. Mr. Vesely, I am not sure that I have understood very well your question. How do we take the Roma inclusion agenda during crisis time? Mrs. Samuel may be better placed than me to address this issue, but I would just say very shortly that we have seen how much in the first line of the victims of the economic crisis are the less educated people, the people that are less flexible for the labor market. So less educated you are, more probably victim of the economic crisis you are. So the message should be clear to the member states that it's in their interest to train their labor force in order to face the impact of the economic crisis. And just very quickly addressing the question from the colleague from Macedonia, how non-EU member states can be kept informed by this? I would say that beyond the meetings of the Roma platform, we should have some sort of periodic meetings, consultations with this decade secretariat, and probably also with the chairmanship of the Roma Decade, to be very frank with you and not to give a wrong message here or an ambiguous message that may raise false and unnecessary expectations. We are not ready in institutional terms to have an institutional cooperation with a decade, a formal cooperation, sorry. We are ready for an institutional cooperation, but not from a formal one. We would need to get a mandate to become members of the decade or observers in the decade or something like this. A lot of institutional trouble, a lot of legal problems that we can, how to say, put aside and we tackle the substance by direct cooperation. We don't need a complicated institutional formula to work together for the same objectives. And we are ready to discuss periodically with you, even beyond the Roma platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurel. I think that this was one of the most concrete answers from the European Commission ever to the decades meetings. Thank you really for that. Would you also like to contribute?
Yes. If I may, I would like to say a few things about the involvement of civil society. And I would like to say that within the framework of the EU 2020, for example, member states are preparing national reform programs. They have to analyze their situation and they have to identify in these reports their main challenges and how they are going to tackle them. And the Commission follows up very closely what they say. And we have the country-specific recommendations. What I want to say is that in the preparation of those plans, everybody, all the stakeholders need to be involved. So civil society has also to be involved, the social partners, everybody, and Roma communities as well. And in the country-specific recommendations, I'm glad to be able to tell you that in this year's recommendations, the ones which were recently adopted and were sent to member states, there are several countries where Roma are mentioned in the recitals to the recommendations. They're not in the context, not in the text of recommendations for themselves, but in the recitals. And the recitals are part of the legal text. So you see that there is a growing awareness of the need to take more seriously the issues of Roma. Also, I would like to say that for the programs, for the structural funds, you know, the ERDF and the European Social Fund, again there, member states are expected, we require from them rather, to consult everybody, including civil society, in the design of these programs, the implementation and the monitoring. And for example, there is a monitoring committee for every program, which is followed by a monitoring committee. If you feel that, you know, you have an important role to play, you could ask, for example, to be part of that monitoring committee at the national level, so that you could follow up what is happening, and you have a right to give your views. Regarding the costs, I think you have answered quite nicely the part which related to what do we do in a social crisis. Well, I think it's very clear to everybody now that the costs of non-inclusion, the costs of non-integration, the costs of not training are much higher than the cost for training. And I think this is a message which is well understood, and I hope that the politicians will get this message and do something about it in all the countries. Thank you.
I'll be very brief on the very relevant question for ISI. What's our role and how do we see the role of the civil society, whether as being partner in implementation or representing and voicing out the Roma claims. I will start by saying what usually George Soros says, that the reality is much more complex than our interpretation of reality. And we understand that there are no clear cuts between what many Roma NGOs do, contracted service provision, against watchdog mechanism. And we, as OSI, are flexible enough to reflect the complexity and to understand that when local administration or public administration is either willing to provide services or not capable to do so, civil society that accumulated certain knowledge after so many years has to jump in and to work on that. And this is our basic starting point. However, I don't think that participation, as you already mentioned, is only enough. We at Open Society Roma Initiatives, we believe that the next phase is the Roma leadership rather than only participation. And this is our prime target, to have more of replication of experiences of having a minister in a government who is actually at the same time national coordinator of the decade, to have more of the elected politicians that will drive the efforts of the government, and to have more of public servants like Mabera or Gabriela, who will lead governmental efforts of public administration. We, in the new setting where we have the decade and where we have the framework, hopefully as complementary but not competing initiatives, we envisage that we will continue what we've been doing for 20 years, strengthening the Roma voice, strengthening the voice of Roma elite, strengthening the Roma leadership, strengthening the leadership outcomes of young Roma students, supporting Roma as voters, supporting Roma NGOs and being drivers of change. We are also concerned about attitudes, and we as Open Society Roma Initiatives will work more on addressing anti-Gypsyism and supporting a network of partners, not only NGOs, but schools, sport clubs, different sorts of individuals and research agencies that will promote positive image of not Roma, but Roma integration. We in OSI also have a luxury to have different sorts of expertise and resources. We have here Kalman Miže, who leads making the most of EU funds, which is the flagship program of OSI that actually supports the efforts of European Union in spending its own money more effectively than now, that a concrete change was not affected by the decade for the reason of limited resources that were invested. And this is one of the vehicles for us. We have also programs that tackle early childhood education that we also will support either governments or civil society in pursuing this agenda. And we have other support programs. But we, as program that I lead, as the director of the coordination office of OSI, will support as well independent monitoring, and we will discuss further with the Commission how we complement each other but not compete each other in supporting civil society, think tanks and individuals in producing critical data to the government where governmental policies fail. And I think that what you said, implementation role of the NGOs is necessary, but also I believe it needs to be temporary until public administration is willing and capable to provide what public administration should provide otherwise for any other citizen. By saying this, I think that we are ready for a coffee break. This was long, but I believe useful sessions. Nobody went outside for a self-initiated coffee break. So I will invite you for a joint coffee break for 15 minutes, and then we will continue. Thank you very much.